Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in.
That's what I want to know.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome back to the Hospopreneurs Podcast, where I interview innovators across the food and beverage ecosystem, from agriculture and brewing to entertainment and tech. Today I'm joined by a guest who spent 2 decades shaping the coffee industry. Saxon Wright, as founder of Pablo and Rusty's and co-founder of Huskee, is pioneering circular economy solutions in hospitality. In this episode, he shares insights on coffee sustainability, the impact of reusable products, and his journey in the specialty coffee world. Hello and welcome to the show, Saxon.
James, hi. Thanks for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. A lot of your career has revolved around the coffee industry, but you're doing some really interesting things now, and there's been a lot of activity, a lot of exciting activity with your work. So I'm really excited to open that up and ask you a little bit more about that. I know you've got an incredibly busy day, an incredibly busy week, so I appreciate you sitting down with me today.
No, it's great to be on.
Saxon, as you know, the first question that I like to ask on the program is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. I'd love to know what you have for the program today.
Yeah, sure. There's a moment in time when you have those experiences where something just truly blows you away and is kind of transformative in how you think about the world. And you know, I was lucky enough to become a coffee judge. I was a judge here in Australia. And it's a funny thing to think about, you know, judging coffee. You know, all different areas of life often have competitions, and you know, whether it's a bar competition or, you know, some kind of food competition. But in coffee, there's another competition. It's the barista competition. There's actually quite a few different competitions in coffee now, but the broadly accepted competition that's been around for quite a long time now is the World Barista Championships and the competitions that go into each country. Yeah, I was lucky enough to become a judge in Australia and then into the World Championships as a sensory judge. And it's one of those competitions where when you go to them, you get to really see a really diverse range of beverages being produced, coffee specifically. And one of the key things they have to do is produce a range or a suite of coffees. And in that, they, you know, share the journey of how they get there. I think that the backstory to this is that a barista that makes it to the World Barista Championships, you know, has to become the national champion first. But what they do is go through a process of finding pretty much the best coffee around the world they can get their hands on. They work with typically the best roasters they can find. They might work for a roaster themselves or have access to someone, and they spend days and days, weeks trying to find the perfect roast for this very specific coffee. And then they spend gosh, I know how many months just preparing the beverage to get the absolute maximum flavors out of this coffee. You know, we think about going to the local cafe and what they do to make a coffee for you, and it's great, and you can have a really great coffee. But imagine a barista that spends pretty much a whole year dedicated to sourcing, finding, roasting, preparing a coffee that is just of such a caliber that it's really mind-blowing. And I guess as a judge, my first year judging at the World Barista Championships, I was served a coffee and it just blew my mind. I mean, it was one of those transformative moments, you know, in any hospitality, food or beverage or otherwise, you know, settings where you get served something that's really so special that you really can't look at it any other way. And I think the privilege I had of being a judge in that environment, and this was in Atlanta, my first year doing it at a world level. And there was a Canadian barista, Sammy Piccolo, who I think that year ended up coming second in the world. But in one of the sessions that he prepared a set of drinks, he said he was going to make this, it's effectively a cappuccino. In Australia, we normally put chocolate on it, but in the competition format, you don't put chocolate on it. But it was a lemon cheesecake, as he described it. And you think, okay, that's interesting. You know, that's a pretty cool flavor note. It's quite specific, you know, et cetera. But to get served a coffee that just tastes like a lemon cheesecake, and all it is the coffee and the milk and the way it's been prepared, and to create a sensory experience, to create a drawback on memories, to reflect back on the things that come together in a single moment is really extraordinary. And you add that to someone that's already done a little bit of research on you, worked out that you're left-handed, and actually poured the coffee in such a way that it presents to face you with the handle spun around. I'm left-handed, so around to the left. The level of detail, the level of focus, the level of flavor that was produced in that one moment to create this experience, which just really, you're just lost in wonder as to, what can actually be achieved with something, so simple as just a cup of coffee, is just something that'll stay with me and is one of those moments that you won't forget. And yeah, lucky to be in the seat at that moment.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. And I just kind of want to place in time when that was. You said that was the first time on the world stage, but how far back are we talking here?
So this is probably about 10 years ago now. Yeah.
Just kind of wanted to place that in the timeline as well, because thinking about sort of citrus-oriented coffee and how that's come through the industry since then, really, right? So yeah, interesting to hear that as well. I just wanted to open that up a little bit more because there are a lot of bests optimized, the most, like I heard a lot of that in describing what these baristas are searching for in that year. There's a lot to cover in that. I just kind of want to summarize it. If you've got any additional points on what really they're looking for when they are trying to optimize the best or the most or the, the greatest coffee in that year.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my view on coffee is that it's only really a downhill journey from when it was at the tree being picked. It's only as good as that point. So really it's about what you're trying not to do to it. You're really trying to protect it from any degradation, from anything that could potentially interrupt its best possible attributes. It's a very fragile thing, a coffee bean, and whilst it feels pretty robust and they're pretty sturdy little beans, but ultimately they're fragile, and the flavors within them and the compounds within them are quite delicate. And throughout the supply chain, it's very easy to lose a lot of the qualities. So to keep all of the essence of what's in there all the way back and even further back into the growing conditions, the soil, the altitude, the fundamentals of how coffee is grown is all part of that journey. So it's really about ensuring you know each of those elements to produce, ultimately in a cup, something that's balanced and has a really clearly defined and articulate flavor profile and, something that captures you in a really positive way and yet doesn't have any negative attributes either. It's very easy to be distracted by negative attributes. So really it's about going, how do we find the great things and minimize the noise around that?
For those who aren't in coffee, maybe they're from another industry or adjacent to coffee even, what are those things that you're looking for? What are those positive attributes? What are the negative attributes?
Yeah, there's so many positive flavors. So I look for a quality and a clear articulation of flavor. I love it when you can really recognize a specific flavor. If you can say, wow, there's an apple note or a raspberry note or something that's both high quality but highly defined, and high intensity of that flavor is something that I really like. I really enjoy it when I can notice those elements. And I think that's, speaking to that experience I had, I think that such clear articulation of flavor is a really amazing thing in a beverage. Yeah, that specificity, I think, is something that I really look forward to.
And negative, and if we can just kind of look at maybe some of the things that is the negative not that? Is it just the opposite of that, or are there other things that could appear in a poor quality coffee?
Sure. So it could be a really blurred flavor or really kind of mushed together, so you can't really pick anything out. But it's also textural if the texture's not right, if it's dry or dusty, or if it's thin on the finish, if it's got an unpleasant feel to it, or if it's overly bitter or it lacks sweetness. I really like sweetness as a natural element in a coffee. So anything that has its own inherent sweetness is really good. I don't want to have to add sugar to something to make it sweet. It should just have its own sweetness. But yeah, bitterness or there are many, other notes that can come out, and that could be due to processing, roasting, or just a poor quality extraction.
Because there is so much between the tree and the cup, right? And like you said there, something that you described at the start of the question, or your answer to the question, was that you want to try to minimize, or like not in these words, but the sort of hurt that you're doing, what you're doing to it. But there are a lot of different processing methods and tools and ways to get it from on the plant to in the cup. Are there some things that you think the industry has been doing that maybe should be changed back to a previous method, or like has it been going off that path that you think it should follow? I mean, you've just got so much experience in the coffee industry. I'm wondering what your comments might be on that.
Yeah, look, I think each area of the chain of custody of the bean itself has improved a lot. I mean, technology has really improved in the coffee industry. I think we were really lacking. I think wine industry and other industries were definitely further ahead. There was a lot more research. There was a much more focus on the science and chemistry of it, whereas coffee has really been a focus on the artistry or the artisan roaster or the handcrafted coffees and things like this. And now we've really turned a corner and become really scientific in our approach. I'm a chemist by trade way back, and so I kind of really enjoy that approach to repeating something, learning, changing one thing and moving along. That's been my journey, certainly in roasting. And so I think, the technology at the bar has improved massively. The tools we've got available to record the data and repeat things has come so far. There's really a lot less chance for error than there used to be. It was very much a bit of a mystery black box when we were dialing in coffees back in the day, 20 years ago. Now we have so much data, we have so much access to quality. And even the roasting business that I set up was because I just really wasn't happy with the coffee that was available at the time and quality of the green coffee being imported, the type of roasting that we did. I mean, the first roaster I set up, we invested a lot of money in custom software for controlling the roaster and customizing the burners, customizing everything we could to just somehow get control and get data over what we were producing so that we could try and replicate it or work out what we did wrong and not make the same mistake over again. But now, some of the technology is phenomenal. And all the way back to the farming itself and some of the farms I've worked with, really closely. And I've been really passionate about getting to origin and understanding the challenges at a farming level, what's happening in the soil, what's happening with the ecosystems, what fertilizers are they putting on. Ultimately it's an agricultural product, and the journey back to origin is really critical. And, we have done a lot of work with putting in color laser sorters or things that help track what's going on, with the cherries. And by laser sorters, I mean actually identifying colors of cherry, which is typically a kind of reddy purple color. And if it's not exactly where we want it to be, it'll flicker to the side. So just getting those controls, the consistency that comes with that kind of technology, which is a recent addition to the farming side of things.
I would love to spend the entire interview chatting with you about these things today, Saxon, but I actually want to kind of start looking at what you have done since founding a coffee roastery and then moving through the coffee industry, really moving up in that industry. I can tell there from bits in your, little parts of your answer there that quite a large part of what you're passionate about is that sustainability aspect. So I'm interested for you to please just tell me a little bit more around how then you came to found Huskee.
Well, Huskee really goes back to the farming story. The genesis of Huskee itself was a group of us wandering around farms, looking at some of the waste issues and going, there's got to be a better way to deal with this waste. We saw husk as one of the examples. So husk is this fibrous shell that you strip off the bean just before processing. And so you need to get rid of that. And it goes through these machines and it's a huller and it pulls off that husk. And the amount of husk that comes off that is huge. I mean, at the mill we were at, there was just mountains and mountains of this husk. And it's a real issue. I mean, you've got to either pay to get rid of it. You can turn some of it back into compost. It's high carbon content, which you can only mix so much of in making a compost. You need a certain amount of nitrogen and other material to balance it out. So you're left with just mountains of this stuff. And if it rains, it can just go moldy. It can be inhabited by mites and rodents and so on. So you really need to deal with it. And we were just thinking it would be great to do something more functional with it. And that really was how it started. It was like, what could we do with this waste? And similarly, at the front end, running cafes, we were looking at single-use cups and the issues there. And one of the ideas that kind of was thrown around was, wouldn't it be great if we could take the waste from a farm and solve a waste issue at the cafe end? And so Huskee was really this merging of ideas to think of a product, and in this case, a cup, something as simple as just a vessel that we could create out of waste and then hopefully reduce the amount of waste we're using at cafes and enable that transition away from single use into something that's more sustainable. And so Huskee is really just this journey of an idea. And we then were like, well, maybe if it was a business, that'd help us because, it'd help fund it. We could grow it. We could do something more with it. And I guess we've just been fortunate enough where, after a lot of trial and error and a lot of hard work to actually make the product in the first place, we ended up getting it to a point where it was a reusable cup that was really durable and great for use in cafes. And so, that whole journey which is about 7 years to this point, has really come into its own, and it's now a fully functional business. We're in over 80 countries, and really trying to build that out as a standalone company, which has been great.
Tell me about that trial and error, the challenges that you had in the beginning to make the product work.
Yeah, I guess there were two key problems. One was a technical challenge. So one is, okay, how do you actually make the physical product? What does that look like? What machines do we use? Are we making, an injected molded product? Are we, how does this material behave? What form does the husk take? How do we mill it? What size particles are we grinding that husk to get it right? There's a sort of a tolerance point where you have to get that right. And what are we mixing it with and why? And what does that look like? So this technical aspect to it. And then the other side of it is, well, who's this product for? Like, what are we making? Like, what's the actual design? Who are the users? What does that look like? What problem are we trying to solve? And I think that was actually, just as hard as the technical one. It's kind of like, well, we've all got ideas. Is it a dine-in cup? Is it an on-the-go type cup? Is it, what does it look like? And so thinking through those two challenges, because every time you change your mind on the front end or on the users, it changes what we have to do at a technical level. So they kind of bounce back and forward between each other. And so I think because neither was really locked down, we had to keep changing. And so every time the idea at the front end evolved, or the kind of attributes we wanted from the cup, if that changed just a little bit, well, then the technical reframing had to happen, and we had to rethink, what does it look like? Okay, does that have any implications on all the work we've done? Just how they connect and what's the final outcome? And you have to sort of slowly, it's almost like an inverted V, and you're just bouncing on the walls, and ideally those walls slowly close in on each other, and you get to the point where you have a finished product that's everything you want it to be.
So who did you engage in that process? I mean, who were you working with to solve those problems?
Yeah, there was quite a few of us involved. I mean, the team itself, we had about 6 founders effectively from various disciplines and different strengths and so on. So we had our own internal team. We worked with technical teams. The farms that we originally worked with are in China. So in Yunnan province, China, there's obviously good manufacturing capability and so on in China. And so we worked with a few producers of different products, but they were willing to work with us to work on the materiality and some of the other elements that we had to work on. And then we were also working with Vert Design in Sydney on some of the design elements and thinking through some of the practical implications of building tools and, finalising some of the design elements of, how does that all come together? So yeah, we use a broad range of stakeholders, and there are others as well that we've lent on. And then you get into all other elements of the business like IP and the trademark side of it, and food contact testing and compliance and regulations, in all the different countries. There's actually so many different things we have to think through to bring the product to market.
What made you want to solve this specific problem? I know that you talked a little bit about the issue there with husks and some of those things, and then kind of you touched on that in a bit more detail then on the venue end, that retail outlet end, and with takeaway or dine-in, trying and working out which problem you're going to solve there. But what made you want to solve this particular problem next?
I think it was more of a chance opportunity. I mean, holistically speaking, I've always considered business as a opportunity to do something good. Pablo and Rusty's was always a business where we wanted to try and give back if we could. We wanted to build a business, and we still do. We want to see that business grow so that we can have a bigger impact in the world. I guess just intrinsically always wanted to do something to protect the environment, and regenerative farming is a real passion of mine. I love the idea of using farming to help rebuild ecosystems and so on. So I guess there's just something in me that wants to do something in that space, and business is a way to do that. That then evolved into looking at some of the problems in the cafe side of things on the front end of the supply chain of coffee, and really going, what's happening there? And single-use cups was becoming a big issue. War on waste happened, and kind of blew up, and everyone's talking about the problems with single-use cups or single-use anything really, which is good. And I guess it evolved. I mean, the original ideas with Huskee sort of started with waste husk and what could we do with that. The problem space kind of increased, and so we kind of grew our thinking to go, okay, well, maybe we should be thinking bigger and more front end. And even now Huskee's evolved again, and we're kind of going, what's Huskee's role in the transition away from single use? And we're less and less focused on our roots in husk and more open-minded about materiality and design and thinking through systems and what does it mean to really facilitate a change into a more sustainable landscape for the entire hospitality sector. We've just become so dependent on single use. And I guess we just have put a self-mandate on ourselves to go, well, we're kind of in the right area at the right time. We've got an amazing team now. We've got this great group of people that can really think about problems more broadly. And so we've just kind of thrown ourselves at this new challenge of single-use packaging and the problems associated, and just taken kind of all of our learnings up to this point and really just focused on this new direction, and still taking a lot from what we've learned from the past and the original roots of the business. And we still have our original range and the products using husk in them, but we've now moved into recycled stainless steel. We've moved into a product called Renew, which is a recycled polymer. So materiality is really key for us, but actually it's solving those bigger problems that we want to tackle. Is kind of where we're heading, and something that really excites us.
Thanks for elaborating on that in a bit more detail at the end there too, because I had a question while you were speaking around exactly that. So thank you for giving a bit more detail on kind of what you're doing to maintain the problem maintain solving the problem that you had set out to solve, while still broadening the definition of what it is that you're solving. So that was quite interesting to hear. I know that you were recently acquired by Biopack, who have also been on the program. I'm not sure how much you can share in the process, but I'd love to know how that comes about. I've had some guests on the show that I've talked with them a little bit about this, but just wondering what your experience was with that sort of acquisition process.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to it. I mean, it's one of those things. I've known Gary, the founder and owner of Biopack, for over 10 years. They've been a supplier of our coffee business. We were really keen to get on board with compostable packaging and compostable single use. If we're going to do single use, let's make it the best possible single use. Let's do it right. So we've been a customer of theirs for a long time. So I've known him, and that was a really easy conversation just to connect with. And funnily enough, when I was first looking for investors, I actually approached Biopack as the first group that I went to say, hey guys, you're interested in investing in the business. And, it's like, maybe, we'll look at it, talk about it, Fast forward a couple of years, the conversations get resurfaced where we were looking for another capital raise, and mainly just because we want to scale our impact, and just realizing that, organic growth is good. And as a business, we were growing, we're profitable, we're doing actually pretty well. But this problem space is outgrowing our capacity to act on it in a meaningful way, and recognizing that really now is a critical juncture to facilitate a transition in this space, and to capitalize on a whole bunch of different things. And doing it on our own and doing it organically was probably just going to be too slow for what I thought both the opportunity is and just kind of the level of impact that I'd always wanted to have through Huskee. And so Biopack, merging with them and for what it's worth, I rolled all my shares into Biopack, so I'm now part of that group. It wasn't just an exit, or anything from that point of view. It was very much a merger to say, actually, it just makes sense if we're both working on the same problem space, albeit coming from very different directions. Biopack have got a really sustainable focus in what they're doing, but they also have a real vision for reusables too. And rather than trying to build that out themselves, they were like, well, look, if we just work through you guys, let's just do it together, and you guys keep doing what you're doing. We can help you scale. Biopack just have a huge reach, massive client base that we can tap into straight away. They're also quite global. They've got a presence in a bunch of countries. So it just, as the conversations evolved from them coming on as an investor to actually, let's just merge and really give this our full focus and attention, has just been this really positive experience. I mean, it's still early days for sure. I mean, we're only from the beginning of April, so it's only a couple of months in. But the freedom they've given us and the support they've given us, and just the willingness to let us just keep doing what we're doing, saying, guys, we believe in your vision. Let's just get there. Let's get there sooner. So yeah, it's just been a really positive transition that's, hopefully get us where we want to get to quicker.
How do you ensure that sort of alignment with investors a bit more generally? When you're doing that due diligence as a founder running your business, how do you just make sure that there is going to be alignment? Or are there any particular questions that you ask along the way?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think for us, we're so mission focused. We're so deliberate about what we're trying to do in the world that if an investor's not aligned with that, then that's really problematic. I mean, I think any business that's trying to do good in the world should still entitled and should make a profit. I mean, if you're making a profit, you can continue, you can grow, you can keep going forward, and it's a good sign of success, even if it's not a goal of success. And that's really key. An investor that's aligned with what you're trying to do is absolutely critical. Otherwise, it just becomes a distraction and a headache. So, yeah, I was very careful. And part of the reason it had taken us a while to find an investor was, we were selective. We didn't want to just work with anyone that just wanted to throw their hat in the ring and just look for a return. And the conversations just moved really quickly with Biopack, and the alignment on vision and how it could all play out just was pretty seamless, if I'm honest. So, yeah, it just made sense. And, I kept trying to find a reason not to. I was like, why wouldn't we do it? What's wrong? What am I missing? What could go pear-shaped? And look, things can go wrong. Don't get me wrong, misread me, but it just, I couldn't see it. I was like, I think this is good. Yeah, I think this is right. And it's the right time to transition. We're ready for it. We do need to scale up. And so, yeah, we just kind of took the opportunity and went with it.
Mm. In there, you said that profitability is a sign of success, but not necessarily a goal of success. I'm wondering what some of your metrics are to measure the success and the impact that you're having in your business.
Yeah, I mean, we have very specific metrics that we're targeting, and one of those is how many cups we're taking out of landfill. How many cups are we removing from being single use? How do we facilitate that change? And so, we can put numbers to that. We're trying to get better at that because a lot of it's anecdotal too with our swap system with Huskee Swap, which is just a check-in, check-out process for people that own their own Huskee cups. We're not tracking that data, so we don't have necessarily all the metrics we would like. We are rolling out a new system that's using an app and some digital tracking, and that'll give us definitely some harder data to work with. But really what we want to do is our level of impact is, how much are we turning the needle from people moving away from single use into reusables? And, where we can impact that, the better. And we just know that every cup that's not going to landfill or out to ocean or doing something else is a good thing. And so, yeah, that's kind of our goal. And that'll expand as we move into food-based products or other types of products, then the metrics will change to match. But otherwise, at the moment, really that's our focal point. I mean, obviously business metrics are still good. We still need to track core business metrics. But in terms of our mission, we want to lean into metrics that really ensure we're staying on track with what we're trying to do.
I'd like to ask you more broadly, what is it that you're learning about or exploring at the moment? I'm wondering where your attention is.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I'm pretty curious naturally. So I often get a bit distracted by looking into and learning about new things. It's probably a weakness where, I find that fascinating. I am drawn into, there's a lot of activity in legislation change and what's happening in governments around the world. And I'm really trying to learn and keep up to date with how countries at large are responding to this waste crisis that's happening. And that's consuming a lot of time. Just, it's not so much learning, but it's really keeping in touch with a global movement and what that looks like. And also participating back here, whether it's APCO or other legislative bodies that are, looking at reducing plastics or changing, legislation, et cetera. So I'm quite involved in a lot of that. But more broadly, I'm fascinated by how technology can change what we do, what's AI doing. It's a hot topic right now, but it's real, and it's affecting business. And so, yeah, I've got to be across it and been going to seminars on AI and a few other things just to make sure that I'm as equipped as I can be in that space. Thinking through any element that can make the business be more efficient, is a good thing. So, yeah, it's covering a fair bit of ground, but yeah.
There's a lot there. I've got two questions out of that. The first is, any places that you'd like to highlight that are really doing things well that you look to in your research of this changing space in sustainability?
Do you mean in terms of like countries or businesses?
I deliberately ask quite broadly because I'd like for you to take that however you'd like. So if it could be an organization, it could be a country, it could be a not-for-profit, or that being an organization, could be another institution of some kind, an individual, anything that you look to that you're like, okay, they do things really well. What are they doing?
Yeah. I think there's some really progressive countries, and that's why I kind of raise it, because there are countries that are actually quite progressive in this space. Countries, I mean, even France is talking about banning single-use cups. There's Ireland is, doing some really progressive things in terms of forward-thinking legislation. And, I feel like Australia is we're very responsive. We're waiting to see what the solutions are. We're waiting, to see how we might play out. We're waiting to make sure we don't annoy any voters anywhere. It's really back foot kind of territory. So, I look at countries that are really pushing forward, and it's really interesting to see kind of how policy shifts is shaping what's happening. And business really responds to that and goes, great, I've got clarity and certainty from a legislation point of view. This is how I can invest. And, I feel like that's a really healthy thing to have, something I would love to see more of here. I mean, and there's some great not-for-profits. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation in America is doing some amazing work of pooling a lot of these resources and trials and testing in this space. There's a lot of unknowns, in what we're doing, and that's one of our challenges for sure. So seeing what's happening in some of those research areas, and there's a lot of pilots and trials in different communities that are looking to move into reusables as a base, and, which is very much our space. So seeing, how those trials work. There's a whole city, Aarhus, I hope I get this right, in Denmark, I think, that's the whole city has transitioned away from single use into reuse. And, so it's happening at a citywide level. So there's some really exciting projects that are happening, and, the people that are behind those are having a go of trying to see what kind of impact they can make.
There was something else at the start of your answer there when you're talking about kind of getting interested in lots of different things, that you're just naturally curious and you like to explore different concepts and possibly questions, certainly ideas. It sounds like you like to solve problems too, which is why you've done some of the things that you've done in your career. I'm interested in your answer to how you stay on track being someone who is so curious and interested in learning about all these different things. How do you go, okay, no, I'm not going to look at that thing that I'm interested in. I need to stick the path that I'm on. What do you do to do that?
Look, I'm not going to lie, that's a challenge for me. I do get distracted and I can wander off a little bit. I think, I do rely on my team to pull me back in line a little bit, and I'm openly tell them, tell me if I'm pushing too far in a new direction. But I think, our company's intrigued, and so it's a good thing to be exploring things. But ultimately, I have to just pull the plug on things and say, what, I can, and I'm a believer in the 80-20 rule. It's a bit cliched, but, I like to get to 80% in something. The extra 20% is an exponential extra amount of work or learning or whatever. And I like to be, I consider myself a generalist. I like to just cover a lot of territory. So both because I enjoy it, but also because I think that's helpful for the business. We cover, so many different things that it's good for me to be across a lot of different things. But, again, I've got to tune that in and go, okay, what is important right now? What's useful? What's effective for the business? And what can I really pull back and say, yep, okay, this is what we're going to focus on. This is what we need to do. So it's just, there is a discipline to it. I think just healthy reflection is good, and just to back and go, okay, what do I need to focus on and what do I need to let go of? And, we often talk in the coffee business, we would always, ask ourselves, what are we going to do next and what are we going to let go of? And it was a discipline to always let go of something. If we're going to do something new, that idea of displacement theory, it's like, don't do something new if you're not letting go of something else. So it's kind of, we have to be balanced with what we take on and also making sure we park something or leave it behind.
And are there a certain number of things that you ensure that you're working on and then letting go of? Is there like not a magic number, but like, is there, a short list that you have to do that?
Yeah, I generally do try and focus on a few things. I generally just try and focus on 3 things and maybe one major thing and 2 minor things at a time. I kind of have okay, what's my major thing? What's my one thing that I need to get done, get across the line, focus on? And then, I allow myself 2 other sort of core things that are like, yep, these are 2 important things. Running a business, there's always lots of little things that crop up and you just have to get done. And that's fine. That's just part of the course. But, what's the core thing? And I try not to have too many major things, like having 3 major focuses would be problematic. So I really just go, what's the one thing that's really important right now? And then what are the 2 other things that I need to keep moving forward that might bubble to the surface and become the major thing, or might just stay as a secondary thing and we just keep that on track, or, whatever the focus might be.
What are they at the moment for you, those 3 things?
The major thing at the moment is a new program that we're launching, which we're calling Huskee Borrow, which is a borrow system. And it's really a significant transition away from, what we've done in the past, which is a sort of product-based focus. This is a system-based focus where we're enabling venues, precincts, universities, all kinds of environments, even cafes or entire council areas to transition away to single use using a system. And so it's basically us supplying the cup, and the cup is scanned and then returned. And as part of that, we're setting up a wash hub, so a large scale washing system that we can collect the cups, wash them, and then redistribute them. So basically replicating the single use process, but you're getting clean, sanitized cups back that are getting reused as opposed to a single use. So that as a system is requiring a lot of energy and effort to get going. And there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of complexity. Super exciting. It's great, but really that's pretty consuming, and everything else is taking a bit of a backseat to that. The second, one of the other things, a necessary focus is obviously as part of the transition and working alongside BioPack is, really making sure that connection with BioPack is really good and getting the systems and things set up that make sense working with those guys. But that'll come to a natural end, and then there'll be, enable space for something else. So
When you say making that connection good, what does that mean? Can you give me a bit more detail on what that is, what you're aiming for there?
yeah, there's just a natural connection between the two businesses. And really what BioPack has said to us is we've got all these resources, be it marketing, logistics, other support services. What's useful for you guys? And so it's kind of learning a bit about their business to go, okay, what are they doing? Digital marketing from BioPack was in our office this morning, just going, hey, this is what we do. This is our learnings. Let's work together. Are there any resources we could share? Global IP, it's like, okay, they use a certain service. Great. Well, maybe we could tap into that and leverage that. So it's really just getting to know what they've got so that we don't have to double up or try and find things that might take us time, or they've already negotiated great prices and we can leverage that. So it's really just connecting to go, okay, where are the synergies that we can lean into to maximize the connection?
I usually ask a question around now on creativity. I just want to apply this to what you've just talked about in your answer there. With right now, you're acquiring information. You're getting this information about another business that you're now part of, that you said you've merged. I have a note that says it was an acquisition, but it sounds like you're very much one and a whole. You're together. I'm wondering how you then play with those ideas. How are you going to sit with that information that you've acquired and then come up with those ways that you can work together?
Yeah, I think it's just reframing of our thinking. I mean, without that, you have a certain pool, or, you're playing in a certain way with a certain amount of resource and certain capacity, certain team. So it really opens the playing field up to think a bit more broadly, a bit more differently. I like to think big about what our impact could be, but often it's a bit far away. Whereas suddenly it's like, okay, actually, if I don't have to think about a whole bunch of different things in terms of growing what we've got, it opens the door to just imagining a different outcome or a different future. And I think the creativity piece is really just going, okay, we can rethink or reimagine what we do here, or the scale that we could do, or the speed at which we could do something. And so it kind of allows you to cast a new lens on what you're working on and reframing and going, actually, there's some amazing talent over there. Let's lean on it. Let's dig up what we can do and shift the dial a bit. So yeah, I guess it's a bit of a rethink. It's a bit of a reset, to consider what we could do and how we go about it.
What's your process in doing that, in playing with those ideas?
My process for creativity is, I like to spend time. I carve out time every week to just stop and think and plan, play with ideas and get a bit more creative, brainstorm different opportunities, and just mind map things out a little bit. So I kind of have my own process for that I find useful.
What's your process for it?
Well, it starts by just carving out time and getting outside my standard environment. So I will definitely try and find some space that's different and it's a unique space, undistracted, and somewhere where I can just think a little bit blue sky and let thoughts wander. So I'm quite open-minded about thoughts just kind of drifting in and out and then exploring them and going down a bit of a rabbit hole, coming back. And then at the end, kind of wrapping them all up into sort of find out, or pick and choose a little bit about what's meaningful and what could be explored further. So I kind of try not to put any boundaries. I think it's really easy to think in really confined boxes. So I do try and spend a little bit of time each week without any boundaries and just see what happens, see where it goes. Who knows what might come out of that. And then if anything comes out of it, then, doing it in a team context as well. So sometimes as a team, we do that and just whiteboard different ideas. Or if we're trying to solve a problem, how do we solve it a different way, or is there different ways of doing things? So I think it's ideas like that evolve. They often build on each other, and then different people have a lot of different perspectives and ideas. So building, bringing the team into that process as well in due course is good too. But I like my own time, but then, with the team is good as well.
Is that the part in the process for you that you test the viability of your ideas? Like when you do bring other people into that conversation around ideas that you've had, when you have reflected and had that time to yourself?
Oh, sure. I mean, you need people to bring you back to earth sometimes. Sometimes you can have some pretty crazy ideas, or it could just be the timing's not right. I mean, I think certainly some ideas are amazing ideas, but it's just not the right time. We either don't have the resource or it's just a distraction or, whatever. So we're careful that not all great ideas are right for launch. So we have to find that balance as well. But yeah, the team's great at just kind of sifting through or really massaging into a shape that could be meaningful and valuable for us. Certainly think about product development. What new products could we work with? What new materials could we work with? What clients are we working with that we could solve their problem a different way? We deal with some pretty large global clients, and what are we doing to do something different? We met with a team from Nespresso last night, and it was just an interesting conversation, just hearing some of the things they're working on, what are some of their problems, and going, actually, I wonder if we could get involved in that. Maybe there's something we're doing that, assist them or facilitate a change for them. So yeah, it's just, there's things just coming up all the time that requires a little bit of focus and a bit of creativity. And, I think that's where, as a team, we're pretty strong.
Saxon, I'm wondering who you ask for advice. You sort of touched on this in an earlier answer, but I'm wondering if there are any, and again, I keep it quite broad. Maybe I'll broaden it even further by combining a bit of another question I often like to ask, and that's around where you're looking for inspiration, for ideas more broadly that you can apply in your business.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in cross-pollination. So I love looking at other industries and going, what's happening over there that we could apply to what we're doing? And it could be, in technology, it could be systems, it could be in waste. There's lots of areas for inspiration. So I'm, at a sort of at a broad level, I'll come back to the individual piece, but at a broad level, cross-industry pollination has been a huge part of how I've looked at things in the past historically and still do, and really value and see, just pick any industry, just look at it for a little while, just, stop and see what's happening in that space and what's working, what's not working, what are its problems, what are its opportunities, almost doing like a SWOT of a whole industry and just get some learnings. And it's amazing what you can take away from that and go, okay, what's happening over there? And does that affect what I'm working on? Is there learnings I could take? Is there impact from that? How do you carry some of those ideas in? And, at a personal level, I guess the principle is I like to find people that are willing to challenge me or are willing to say your ideas are not so good, or I don't want to be surrounded by people that are just going to agree or just say, oh, that's a great idea. Like everything you say, it's like, no, I want people that speak their mind and can challenge me. My CEO that runs Pablo and Rusty's, he's great at just, just feeding back. He's like, you know what? That's not a great idea. It's like, I think we should do this. He's like, no. We just have a really frank conversation, and I really value that. I think it's really important to have people that are just real with you and can speak their mind, and they see something, they'll tell you. If they think you're off track, they'll tell you, So I do like to try and find people that are outside of my field, outside of my industry, people that I trust and know that, firstly, that they'll tell me what they think, but also it's good to have people that aren't in your space either. People that aren't, some of the best advice are from people that aren't necessarily experts per se, but they're just looking at it from a very different perspective and can give you some honest thoughts. And sometimes there's just amazing nuggets in that. They don't even realize they're giving you great advice, but it just challenges how you think and helps you see the world a bit differently. And in the last couple of years, countless times people have just said a little something or responded to something they're asking about what I'm working on, and I'll say something completely out of field that I or any of our team wouldn't have come up with. So, I think those kind of opportunities and having trusted friends and colleagues that are removed is really valuable.
So how do you know what parts of that to listen to and what not to, and to stick to your initial idea or take on a new idea? How do you identify what that part is? I know it's a very complicated question to try to answer, but how do you do that?
I think there's a certain intuition and you just have to go with it. For me, there's no true right or wrong. None of us really know the future, where we have to take risks at some level. And so I have a reasonably high appetite for risk. I'm willing to take risks, and that often just means stepping into the unknown and you're just trusting your intuition and the best assimilation of data, of insights that you've got about your own business. I know the business well. I know the space you're in, and it doesn't mean you know the answer or the outcome or what you should do next, but it should guide you. You should have a certain amount of gut instinct that will facilitate that. And also I'm just, if we make a mistake and get it wrong, we get it wrong. We just keep moving though. I don't want to be stuck with indecision. I don't want to be not moving anywhere. So, I guess a strength I've got is just to make decisions and keep moving, doesn't mean I'm right, but we just keep moving, and we just have a shot at it and take our learnings. And if we get it wrong and we move on. But I think more than anything, just moving forward is critical, and that's what we want to keep doing.
Saxon, I've only got a couple more questions for you today. This next one, I guess it's the third last question, and that's, what are you experiencing friction with at the moment? I'm interested to understand a problem that you're solving currently. I know we've talked about some really big problems. You've talked a lot about different projects and things as well along the way. But to keep with my sort of theme of asking broad questions, what are you experiencing friction with currently?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of friction points that we have to deal with. I mean, I guess there's, at a macro level, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns with this new system we're building, where, we're grappling with a lot of just best guesses. So there's trying to get answers is difficult, right? So, we're trying to make decisions, and trying to get the kind of answers we want is not easy. So we're making a lot of assumptions. But then on a kind of, a more grounded, practical level, we deal in the food space. We're constantly dealing with changing regulations in food contact. It sounds pretty boring, but European regulations are changing, and just trying to get a sense of how do we standardize our products? How do we keep manufacturing efficient? But yet we have to jump through so many hurdles for, so many different countries who have myriad of different testing requirements on us. And it's just it's a bit painful and just slows us down. So, we're trying to work out how to streamline that. But, that's just an example of just, the hoops we have to go through in the industry we're in with this product. We're still learning that, but it's just a challenge. It's just a bit painful, if I'm honest. We're just trying to get our way through it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I asked the question because it's interesting to know what problems guests have, like what you're facing, what you're solving on a day-to-day basis, what you come up against. So thank you for sharing that. The penultimate question I have for you on the show today is one that I've been asking a little bit more recently. I'm really quite interested in the answer. Every time it's something new and different. So I'd love to know what yours is. And that's, what's something specific that's incredibly important to you that your customers, colleagues, competitors, what they aren't likely to recognize or know about, or possibly even understand or appreciate? Maybe let's focus a little bit more on your customers or colleagues in the way that you work. So something that essentially that you believe is valuable that's often overlooked.
I think within the business itself, we have such a focus on details and the simple beauty of products. And I think, we try and make design, nice design products or so on, but we just go to such lengths for people to enjoy a product. A bit like a coffee that I was talking about earlier. When you don't notice the negatives, that's great. You just focus on the positives. But to get rid of the negatives is actually, hard work. And I think in what we do is really trying to take out every negative element of, something as simple as a cup, right? I mean, everyone's like, yeah, cups, they've been around for a long time. So it's not like we invented cups. But, how does it hold in your hand? What type of hands? How many different hands do we need to test to get the width right? Or, how does it feel on your lip when you drink? And is the angle just right? There are just so many little details that I think no one will ever know. We live in this world where we are just dealing with all of these tiny little details. What's the texture of the material? What's the feeling of it? How does it respond to heat? Or how does it come out of the dishwasher? Little drains that we put on the bottom of the cups that no one knows what they're for, but they're there so that the cups don't make a mess when you empty the dishwasher, or just these tiny details. And I think I just think it's one of those things that we often laugh about internally, that we could spend hours trying to solve a problem that no one will ever know existed, ever.
That's good design.
Well, I guess it is.
If you're able to solve those problems.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. The last question that I have for you is possibly a much more simple one, and that's, who would you like to hear on the show?
It's a great question. I mean, there's so many people I'd love to hear from. Someone I was thinking about that I'd love to kind of get an update on is a guy I've met a couple of times. He runs Bluestone Lane over in the US, and the US is just such an interesting and dynamic and changing market. And he started a cafe business that's now, close to 100 cafes, and to have grown a business in the US in a pretty tricky space and to be, really that successful. And I don't know if you know of Nick Stone or not, but someone that I think's done an incredible job building a hospitality business in the US, and, Australian guy, taken our coffee culture over there and, really seen it's great success. So to hear his journey and story and where it's up to now would be great.
Amazing. I don't know Nick, but I would love to meet him. I'd love to have a chat with him. So thank you very much for sharing him, but thank you very much even more so for joining me today. Saxon, I appreciate your insights. It was a really interesting chat with you today. Thanks.
So good to be on the show. Thanks, James.
This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.